And yeah, you mentioned the other issue with baselines in their place right now in healthcare is oftentimes we're tracking the wrong measures and getting
Yeah.
the baselines that don't give us the information we need, like BMI, for example, where we cannot necessarily distinguish between fat mass and muscle mass
Mm-hmm.
with that measure alone. And so we have South Asians falling through the cracks because their weight is more centrally their excess fat is more centrally located as
Mm-hmm.
visceral fat, which
Mm-hmm.
has totally different
Right.
properties.
Right. Yeah, and all that's important to know, but I think it's also no one measurement should be like overblown, right? So you need to get, you have an assessment of many measurements that you're aware of how they kind of interact. But I think like in some places like BMI is like underrated and in some places it's overrated, right?
Okay.
Like so like I to your point, I think like when it comes to like metabolic disease or something even like cardiovascular disease, it might be overrated in a way. Like unless you're looking at other things, because because you fall in what would be normal there doesn't mean that you're like perfectly safe. On the other end of that, there's I think like sometimes in the fitness community where or like especially the sports community where it's just poo-pooed because it's like most people that are athletes have so much muscle mass that they would be like on the high, they would be obese in many of those scales, that as life evolves, you just sort of like think that it's okay to be like that much heavier because you're assuming that you have like mostly muscle mass. And I think that assumption actually isn't necessarily true when you look at it later in life, or like even like you can be super strong and have like the attributes we were talking about, but you may actually be better, closer to an optimal BMI if you're coming from the other end where you were so used to being very muscle bound and things like that. So it's because that's actually taxing too, to like have too much mass for any reason, even if it is more muscle than not. So I think like on some ends that could be overestimated and underestimated. But to your point, yeah, it's like it's just one measure. So like it shouldn't be the be all end all. But sometimes I find that like personally, like I just went through a process where I lost like 15 pounds and I got myself into a more optimal BMI. And I was more of the mind where it's like, I don't care what my BMI is, right? Like, because it doesn't take into account my muscle, but I feel so much better at nearly 40, at a lighter weight. I'm like, I just think I'm going to want to be here more than 20 pounds heavier. Doesn't matter what that 20 pounds is made of, like as I get older, you know what I mean? So, and that's a personal experience, but I do think there's a lot of clients that I have that still have a mentality that they kind of just want to put on like 20 pounds of muscle, but they don't want to change their body weight. It's like, things don't really work that way. You know what I mean? It's like a lot of times you have to, take some weight off too. And then your body fat percentage improves as well until you get to like, an elite place or where you're, more of an athlete where like you actually need the mass to compete, but you also want to get stronger too. Like that's a different conversation, but that's not where I think like health lies necessarily. Like they're two different conversations.
Yeah, this is a good point. And I'm curious, you recently lost 15 pounds of weight?
Yeah, I mean over the last like several months, and I'm like keeping it off now, but I just like I feel better here.
Does this correlate with like the timing of or just having one meal a day? Do you think?
I've been doing that for longer, but
Okay.
it makes the process easier. I'll tell you that right now.
Okay.
So that's like one meal a day during the week, at least during my work week, has become pretty standard. It's become like more habitual that like when I don't do it, it's like a special occasion. All right. And it's not because I'm hungry. It's more because I'm out and I'm like, okay, yeah, let me just stop here. But like, I fill that time that I would normally be eating like lunch with other things, and like breakfast, I don't even think about because then it's just my morning routine doesn't include that. So, yeah, that's become like more of a habit. And because that's become more of a habit, then like any adjustment I want to make to my calorie intake is like within less meals. So it makes that process, I find, a bit easier, but I definitely still have to pay attention to when I eat, like what I'm eating. It's not like, oh, because I eat one meal a day, I'm good. Like I don't have to think. It's
Yeah.
the opposite in many ways. Like I have to be more cautious because it feels like I'm not eating a lot because I only eat one meal a day. But it's just, it makes that, like, I still feel like I'm getting a pretty big meal in a day because I get like all my calories in one meal, but like you can totally overeat so easily. And so there's got to be mindfulness no matter what. Um, but I did a challenge called 75 hard for 75 days. And that, in that process, I was just consistent with like tracking my caloric intake, tracking my caloric expenditure with exercise. And then also, making sure that like the two were where they should be. So I was at a deficit for the most part. And it was a gradual thing though. Like, so I didn't feel like when that 75 days was done that I needed to like do something different. I was just like, okay, this is my new normal in many ways.
Okay. So what tools were you using to calculate your, especially caloric expenditure?
So I use my Fitness Pal for the calories in, and then also that gave me like a lot of the goals that I would look at for like how many calories that I would eat per day. It also kept track of if I was plugging, like I burned a certain amount of calories. Like sometimes I would use that and say I can eat more based on the calories expended. And then I use a Polar H10 heart rate monitor with the Polar Beat app to keep track of calories. But again, like I would put that on for every workout, no matter what. And you expect that the workouts that were like more strength oriented, because I would make sure I'd stay in a strength program, that I wouldn't expect those calories to be that high at all. Because like I'm doing like a set of 5 reps, maybe taking 2-3 minutes in between. Like there's no intention of really getting the heart rate up that high there. Or if it does, it sparks like when I'm in, for a second when I'm in the hardest part of the rep, but then like as soon as I'm done, it goes right back down, and you want it to go down, or you're not really going to be ready for your next set, because the intention is not to be tired. It is to create more force to lift heavier things. Right. So it was good just as a teaching tool too, to see like what things burn more calories or what things get your heart rate up easier than others. And then getting the heart rate up for longer tends to be, a good formula for burning more calories. But like, that's not the only thing you want to do with purposeful exercise. And I think when people have like weight loss goals, they think that's what's important, and they miss the other stuff. That's like you're going to end up doing the same stuff over and over again that you find easiest, and then you miss out on all of the other things that you could be building that really, I think, matters more than anything from a versatility standpoint.